Welcome to News in Focus with your host, Chris Long, President of the Ohio Christian Alliance. Stay tuned for an analysis and conversation about the issues that matter most to you and your family. Here now with this week's edition of News in Focus is Chris Long.
And good afternoon and welcome to this edition of News in Focus. We're going to be talking about energy policy in the United States in this panel discussion, and you're going to be excited to hear our panel of guests as we've had them on the program before. We're going to be talking about really Mr. Trump's promises to the coal industry. You'll remember when Mr. Trump ran for office and he promised the coal miners, we'll put you back to work. We're going to have an effective energy policy in this country. Of course, the president is working hard to keep his promises to the coal industry and to those coal miners throughout the Midwest in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and other states that are coal producers. But there's been an uphill battle, and we're going to talk about continued fallout from Obama's war on coal. And actually, it hits locally here in Barberton, Ohio, as Babcock and Wilcox, that company that actually produces the generators for coal-driven power energy plants, has actually had to restructure. They're having financial troubles, and there's been some job layoff there and restructuring of that company. Again, continued fallout of Obama's war on coal. Well, with me on the phone is a panel of experts. We have with us Chairman and CEO of Murray Energy, Mr. Bob Murray, also Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio's 6th District, indeed a coal district in the state of Ohio that runs the length of the Ohio River there. And with us also in the Senior Advocacy Organization 60 Plus Association, Chairman Jim Martin. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you again, Chris.
Always.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, gentlemen, we've had some great discussions over the last few years, and we've got new material that actually bolsters the argument of what we've been talking about, grid reliability, a effective energy policy going forward. But there, Mr. Murray, there's been an uphill battle. You've been on the front line of it, and there's so many different facets to it, whether it's dealing in Washington with really lunatic policy when we consider the Green New Deal. We'll get to that a little later in the program, but actually dealing with the FERC. The president has actually replaced some people there. We're going to get your thoughts on those replacements and what FERC may do. And, of course, the Energy Secretary, Rick Perry, is trying to move forward with, again, an effective policy that will help the coal industry and actually benefit us all when it comes to reliable, affordable energy, electric energy on the grid. But let's first tackle a couple of things. We've had the third polar vortex just in the last few months, in the last 5 years. You know, some of the paper reports are saying this is a one in a lifetime event. Well, as we know, there's been 3 of them now in the last 5 years, as just the opposite of global warming that some loony environmentalists say. We've actually had global cooling. In fact, the glaciers are growing in Greenland. The ice pack is growing in the Arctic Circle. And then, of course, we've had these 3 polar vortexes in 5 years that have put stress on the electric grid and is really challenged. And actually, Mr. Murray, it is the kind of coal plants that you're supplying material to that has helped keep the gas on in people's homes, electric going, both in the Northeast and now in the upper Midwest, as First Energy Solutions has had to sell energy to that power grid when they had their deep freeze this winter. Your thoughts on that?
Well, we've had mild winters on top of it. If we'd have had really cold winters, more people than the 22 that died in last January, a year ago, as a result of the one cold snap we had last winter, it would have been even more of a disaster. We need 20% 30% is better. Coal-fired generation in the country to keep the lights on, keep people from dying, to keep our homes heated. You can't store natural gas at a power plant. You can't store the wind. You can't store the sun. So when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, and there are huge interruptions of natural gas all the time. And power plant generation from natural gas is secondary to home heating with natural gas. We saw that this past winter when there wasn't any gas available. And electric rates in New York City went to $200 a kilowatt hour from a normal $25 or so. We need coal-fired generation, at least 30%, to keep a reliable, resilient, low-cost power grid. And those who are advocating differently, and that's generally every Democrat in the United States, are misleading the people and are creating a crisis. Electric rates, with their crazy policies in California, where it's dominated by Democrats, their electric costs are 3 times the rest of the country's average in what they pay for electricity. And the Obama administration itself, which started all this in 2008, said you could shut down every coal-fired plant in the United States, and it would have an immeasurable effect on the world's temperatures. Immeasurable. And then they defined the word immeasurable by saying 0.02 degrees Fahrenheit. That is immeasurable. You don't have to debate whether climate change is happening or not, which, as you have said, it is not. The Earth is actually cooling. It's a political platform. But the Democrats themselves, in their own study, said that closing down every plant in this country would not affect global temperatures, except to 0.02 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have to get away from this. And I am so disgusted with the New England electorate, the left coast electorate, who hire or elect people such as Markey of Massachusetts, who supports the insane New Deal, Green New Deal. He knows better than that. The White House of Rhode Island, even Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, has gotten overboard with this political nonsense. So I'm worried because for 62 years I have studied the electric power grid. I'm knowledgeable of it. I know how fragile the margin is in the power grid. We cannot shut down more nuclear plants or more coal-fired plants and have a stable grid.
Well, that's right. And in fact, it was the nuke plants in Ohio and Pennsylvania, along with the coal plants, that actually provided additional power to the grid to Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois and Iowa during this most recent polar vortex plunge. Congressman Johnson, are those reports getting back to your colleagues in Washington? I know on the loony left with AOC, and by the way, it was interesting to see the Senate vote. We'll have Jim Martin, because I know he knows a lot of these senators. Nobody wanted to vote for that stupid new Green Deal that she's talking about, shutting down the airline industry and everything else. But, I mean, your other colleagues and more even a few common sense Democrats maybe, are they looking at these reports of what actually happened with the polar vortex and who was able to deliver? It wasn't wind and solar. Wind actually just fell off the grid entirely because there was no wind blowing, and we had power outages. The reports of the fallout of that has yet not been fully revealed, but your thoughts on that, Congressman?
Well, I can tell you that in our hearings on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we are certainly focused on what is providing our power, the energy, the resilience, the base load to the energy grid. And I tell you, there's not a person that I know on the Republican side of the dais that doesn't recognize the importance of coal-fired energy as it pertains to the resilience and reliability of the grid. You know, Chris, we have been burning coal to produce energy in America since 1880s. By 1961, coal had become the major fuel source in America for providing energy to our energy grid. It was the coal industry that brought us through World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all of those international conflicts that we faced. And it was coal-fired energy that provided the innovative engine, that fueled the innovative engine for all of the innovation and great discoveries that occurred in the century after the Civil War. So I can tell you that there is a great awareness among Republicans on the dais on energy and commerce about the importance of coal-fired energy. And you bring up a good point. And we just had a press conference about an hour ago, and I was surprised at how many people overlooked. You know, that vote in the Senate yesterday, not one single senator voted in favor of the Green New Deal to bring it to the floor for a debate, so it couldn't pass cloture. Many of those senators had already co-sponsored the legislation, including some of the very Democrats that say they want to be president of the United States. And they won't go on record on where they stand on the Green New Deal, but they co-sponsored the Green New Deal.
Yeah.
So how in the world can we trust these Democrat socialist presidential candidates if they won't put their vote where their mouth is and tell the American people where they stand on this important issue? But you know me, Chris, coal and nuclear energy make up a very critical part of our energy profile, and I'm sure glad we're continuing these discussions to make sure that people in eastern and southeastern Ohio understand that.
Well, that's right. And our folks have been following this discussion throughout, and they're not fooled by this rhetoric, leftist rhetoric in Washington. And actually, they're very, really angered about it. You know, at first they laugh about it, but then they, like Mr. Murray, they're concerned about the future of the electorate. Jim Martin of the 60 Plus Association, your thought about the Senate vote, not one Democratic senator wanted to come forward to put that forward for a debate. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And to follow, and thank you, by the way, Chris, for continuing these discussions with Bob Murray and Congressman Johnson specifically up here on Capitol Hill. You know, we started out with the war on coal under Obama, and he almost killed a whole industry that the world depends on right now is coal. Getting to that vote, the Green Deal was voted down 57-0. It defies common sense. It's Looney Tunes, if you will. And to go to what Bob Murray said a while ago about Ed Markey up in the Northeast and others, and as Bill Johnson just said, these folks running for president, Kamala Harris, she said, we've got to vote now for this Green New Deal. Ed Markey, we've got to vote now. Kristen Gillibrand, we got to vote now. Spartacus, he said, we got to vote now. Schumer, we got to vote now. Merkley out in Oregon, we got to vote now. So Leader McConnell, and we just met with some of his people this morning, Leader McConnell gave them that opportunity yesterday to vote. How did they vote? They voted present. Not a one of them had the guts to vote for the Green New Deal. And so that was pretty significant, I think. But let me point out one other thing, what Bob Murray was saying a minute ago about the vortex.
Yes.
And there's going to be a worse one probably coming. And that's something that coal, which Mr. Murray, he's the last man standing in this industry apparently, but coal and nuclear can meet the demand. Solar and wind cannot meet the demand. Wind turbines shut off when there's certain low thresholds on temperatures. Wind is less productive when temperatures are high. Solar works only when the sun is shining. And natural gas that everybody's turning to now. Natural gas pipelines are subject to freezing, but the thresholds for coal freezing, very low. Thank God for Mr. Murray and the coal industry. The world now is producing more coal around the world in Asia and in India than we are here because of all the restrictions put on us by the Obama administration. But I think I like to be optimistic. And I think with the help of President Trump, who's been stymied, by the way, by not getting folks into the EPA at the DOE where Rick Perry is. It took almost a year to get half of their team in there. And if you don't have your team, you can't very well turn back these regulations that have been killing the coal industry.
Well, that's right. And we talked on this program. We had in 2014 a polar vortex. We had another one just last year. And then this year, another polar vortex, the third in 5 years, as the sun is actually in a quiet cycle that scientists say will last at least 10 years. They're looking at the solar flares, basically, and the sunspots, and they project these things. It's almost like a calendar. There are some projections that they've actually been looking at sunspots going back over a millennial. And so throughout history, we've been able to tell when the sun goes into a quiet cycle. We're in one of those right now. The word is not global warming, and you don't even hear the leftists. They'll say climate change. But they've aborted the term global warming because anyone can see just the opposite is what we're seeing here is actually global cooling. And so us here in the Northeast region, Midwest region, now we're faced with this. And if you start taking off these coal plants, which are slated to shut down by First Energy, big energy supplier here in the Midwest with their arsenal also of nuke plants, and we don't have replacements for those folks. And wind could not operate during the polar vortex. Gas lines, even as you said, Jim, they could not deliver during the polar vortex. And so those gas turbines went offline. What produced? What filled the gap? What provided the extra energy? Coal and nuke. Congressman Johnson, your thoughts?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, you can't fill that void of reliability on the grid, and all of the coal-fired energy that has been taken off the grid as a result of the Obama administration's war on coal. You can't backfill that with wind and solar energy. It takes coal-fired energy. It takes nuclear energy to do that, and it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. Chris, I have long maintained that there is a place in our energy profile for alternative energies, for so-called green energies. Hydropower,
yes,
wind and solar, but these need to be market-driven solutions.
Yes,
because when you let nuclear and coal and even gas-fired energy, I understand Mr. Murray's contention that you can't keep gas stored at a gas-fired power plant. I understand that issue, but even gas-fired energy, when compared to wind and solar, there's no comparison in terms of providing resiliency and reliability to the grid. And our energy needs are not going to decrease as we see our economy continue to surge, manufacturing beginning to come back. We're going to need more energy, not less. So I think we're going to have to stay on top of this. And, one of the things you mentioned earlier, here on Energy and Commerce, one of the things that we're doing is making sure that federal agencies like FERC and the FEC. Now, you don't often think of I'm sorry, not FEC, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission.
Yeah.
You don't often think of the Federal Communication Commission when you think about energy. But don't forget that our energy grid today is largely controlled by computer networks, and so we're vulnerable to cyber attacks. So making sure that FERC and the FCC are communicating with one another and doing it the right way to make sure that grid reliability and resiliency issues from a cybersecurity perspective are being addressed. That's something else that we're focused on here. But I subscribe to the other comments that you've made, Mr. Murray and Jim, about the resiliency and the reliability aspects. of coal and nuclear.
Well, Mr. Murray, in the last few years on this program, we've talked about these issues of reliability of the grid that coal provides, affordable energy, reliable energy, especially when you need it. There in Wisconsin and Minnesota during the polar vortex this year, there were power outages. I wish we could have some of those people on the program to talk about that, because it was literally life-threatening as you had temperatures that plunged with wind chills minus 20 to minus 70 below zero. It was actually colder in those states than it was at the Antarctica station of the U.S. in the South Pole. So, I mean, these were the kinds of dangerous situations that occurred for some of these people. Thank God it wasn't widespread, or you would have had a lot of fatalities with that. Mr. Murray, your thoughts?
Again, as I said before, Chris, 22 people still died. It was not a bad polar vortex. It was a mild winter, but still 22 people died. Let me take you to another aspect of all this that we're not talking about. Your listeners have to pay their electric bills. Electric bills are going out of sight. And let me tell you why. As of this morning, a new solar panel, electricity, average cost in America, $140 a kilowatt hour. Windmill, $107 per kilowatt hour. Natural gas, if it isn't shut off, but its primary use is for home heating, so it's only there for power generation if there's enough in the grid, because that's a finite pipeline. They can only get so much in. It's still $45 a kilowatt hour. Coal is $40 a kilowatt hour. That is from the Institute on Energy Resources, a very credible organization, as of this morning. And so we don't have a climate change problem in this country. We have an energy poverty problem. People are paying too much for their electricity. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, is feckless. It is not doing its job.
Right.
Not a state utility commission in this country is doing its job, because the electric utility makes more money if they spend more money. That's how the rules are rigged, and they're not being changed in any state, and there's no effort to do it. So they don't spend any money on a coal-fired plant they're closing, and they've closed 7,000 megawatts since the election of Obama and the Democratic Congress that he had in both houses in 2008. 107. That's 40% of the coal industry has been closed down.
Oh my!
That's the number as of this morning. 107,000 megawatts, and that's the $40 a kilowatt hour electricity.
Okay.
Not the $140 a kilowatt hour solar, or the $107 a kilowatt hour. And these are from independent agencies. These are not my numbers.
All right, hold right there.
So what is happening is we're not only into a supply problem and a crisis. People are not going to be able to pay their electric bills.
We are talking with Bob Murray of Murray Energy, Congressman Johnson of the Ohio 6th District, and Jim Martin of the 60 Plus Association. We're going to continue this discussion on the other side. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages.
Who's looking out for seniors today? It's not the AARP. AARP worked overtime to help pass Obamacare, the legislation that cut over $700 billion from Medicare. And AARP supports the death tax, which can rob families of over half their savings due to the death of a loved one. Seniors know that AARP would rather make millions peddling insurance products than support the policies that actually help America's elderly. That's why America's seniors count on the 60 Plus Association. For more than 20 years, 60 Plus has been fighting for the seniors that AARP has left behind. 60 Plus fought against Obamacare and continues to fight every day for its repeal in Washington. And 60 Plus is the leading national organization working to repeal the death tax once and for all, so that families can pass down their businesses and farms to the next generation, not the IRS. Stand up for your values. Join 60 Plus today. Visit 60plus.org or call 703-807-2070. This message paid for and authorized by the 60 Plus Association.
Roundtable.
When?
Roundtable.
When?
Roundtable.
When?
Be part of the discussion. Roundtable with George Satari every Monday night from 7 to 9 p.m. right here on 1220 The Word. The roundtable discussion of today's hot issues covering federal, state, and local with George Satari. Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. WHKWradio.com 1220 The Word. Get your seat at George's Roundtable now.
And we are back, and we're talking and continuing our roundtable discussion on Obama's war on coal, the fallout, and, of course, President Trump's promise to the coal industry to put coal miners back to work and to, of course, address the issues of the coal industry that President Obama unfortunately decimated the industry. We just talked about 40% of the coal-generating plants in this country of the coal producing was affected by that under the Obama years. But coal is trying to make a comeback, but it's a hard way back. And we're going to talk about how this is going to affect your bottom line with your utility bill. This is affecting seniors on fixed income, that single mom who's paying her electric bill. And as we pay more for energy, it's because of these policies. With us on the phone is Chairman and CEO of Murray Energy, Mr. Bob Murray. Also, Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio's 6th District, and also Jim Martin, Chairman of the 60 Plus Association. Gentlemen, as we continue our discussion, and we talked about the polar vortex, you know, one of the things that hit us here in Northeast Ohio, and there was a major news story about Babcock and Wilcox in the City of Barberton, which is really a blue-collar community outside of the city of Akron, and that is their largest employer over the years. They, of course, made the power generators, boiler units for the energy industry. They've had to cut back. They're actually moving their facility. They're downsizing. And when I saw that, I thought of a lot of these blue-collar Democrats that actually supported President Trump. They knew more than a lot of other people did of exactly some of the leftist policies that were going to affect them and their bottom line. I hope they remember that as we go into 2020. Mr. Murray, your thoughts?
I know President Trump reasonably well. I was with him at his home in Florida last week. He deeply cares about working people. There are many traits President Trump has that I don't understand and, frankly, I don't agree with. But the one thing I do know about the man, he cares about working people. I worked underground in the coal mines for 16 years and still went underground every week until I was 76. And I've been around working people all my life. He supports working people. I know that. He must have got to know the carpenters and the plumbers and the steeplejacks when he's building those buildings in New York, because he does understand working people, and he gets it on this crisis that we have in this country with the killing of the entire coal-fired generation industry. He understands it. He gets it. He's tried. Unfortunately, he's not had the support of the people on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and he certainly isn't getting the support of the commissioners of the various states, Public Service Commission, Public Utility Commission, depends on what state it is. They're supposed to regulate the reliability and the cost of electricity. They're not. They're allowing the utilities to be politically correct. And I say that facetiously because that's where they're going. They're not worried about the ratepayer and what people are paying. They're worried about the shareholder. And I see this, not all of them. There are a couple of utilities that are committed to their shareholders. Most are not. And what they do is they make more money when they spend more money under the state regulatory commissions. So they spend money for a new gas plant, new natural gas, or for a windmill or a solar panel. And they get so much back for it. get any reward for not shutting down a coal-fired generation. Yet, the coal-fired generation, as I said, is $40 a kilowatt hour. These two renewables are $107 and $140 a kilowatt hour, and on a good day, natural gas is $45, and it's not available in a crisis when coal periods. It's been proven now for 3 years in a row that natural gas is not there. Pipelines freeze, but mostly home heating takes what natural gas there is. It's a finite pipe. You can't get more gas into the pipeline, and therefore gas does not help you in these periods where we have these cold snaps. And so we're below now. I estimated 12 years ago that it could go 30% coal-fired in our business, and I planned that way. It's actually dropped now to 27%. Below that, it's scary. I've studied it, Chris, for 62 years, the electric power grid, and I don't have a monetary stake in that would supersede my concern for the American people. They're paying too much for their electricity because of these policies, and the power grid is becoming more unreliable all the time. The president understands it. He's tried to get something done. I'll tell you, and I apologize, Bill, because I know you're the strongest guy in Congress for low-cost, reliable electricity, but frankly, he hasn't gotten the support of the Republican-led Senate during his term, the president. He has certainly not getting any support now from the Democrat-controlled House. And I think the Republicans in the House contributed their own, turning the House over to the Democrats more so than the president did. But anyhow, I'm not an expert on that. I just have an opinion. But I am an expert on the electric power grid.
Yes.
And I'm worried for America.
Absolutely. And you know, when we think about it, it's really not a level playing field. In recent years, we've had renewable mandates. We still have them here in Ohio. That has not been addressed by the Ohio legislature. We're still pushing on that. It's going to affect industry. Again, it causes even the bottom line of the manufacturers and businesses in Ohio have to pay those higher rates, graduated rates with renewable mandate buys. And again, coal is left out of this, and it should be a level playing field. If renewables want to enter the grid, do so at your own dime. Don't make me pay for it as a consumer. And it's added to my electric bill. Businesses paying for it. This is ridiculous. Jim Martin, your thoughts on that?
Well, again, coal, as Mr. Murray has pointed out, is the by far cheaper fuel source, and the polar vortex experience illustrates that coal is more reliable. It's cheaper than solar and wind. If I have to go back to solar and wind, that's a farce in my estimation. That's 90 years, 100 years down the road perhaps. But pick up on what Bob Murray said about President Trump. Remember, now, President Trump got rid of he got us out of the Paris Climate Accord last year. I was sitting in the Rose Garden when he did that. And much to the chagrin of all the Enviro folks, his biggest round of applause came when he said, I listened to the voters in Pittsburgh, not in Paris.
Yes.
And he's followed through on that. He's been stymied at every turn by all the Enviros. But again, just this past Monday, the International Energy Agency came out with a finding. It said the world's growing thirst for energy has led to higher emissions from, quote, coal-fired power plants than ever before. What they didn't say, though, it's not true for coal-fired plants here in the United States. It's true for those coal-fired plants in Asia and India. And the Paris Climate Accords that they all agreed to, none of them are abiding by those accords.
Right.
They can't. They've got to depend on coal. Coal is the future. And my father was a coal miner. But today's coal industry, as Bob Murray knows so well, it's not my father's coal industry. It's been hammered by the liberals. But looking forward, not backward, is our challenge. President Trump is leading the way. Bob Murray, thank goodness you're still standing. and fighting for coal miners all over this country.
Congressman Johnson, as we look at this, obviously a multi-tiered problem, and what can the administration do at this point? We have aging nuclear plants here in Ohio that, quite honestly, we can't afford to take them offline. I mean, we talk about national security issues with the grid. You take them offline with the coal plants coming offline or slated to close by First Energy Solutions. What's the thoughts there in Washington with the Department of Energy with Rick Perry and the new configuration of FERC? Is there any hope there at all with these new the seats being changed on FERC?
Well, as you know, Chris, and by the way, when I answer this question, I am going to have to run because I've got a budget meeting I've got to get to.
Yes, sir.
But that being said, as you know, I work in the legislative branch. I'm not in the administration. So I can't tell you what the administration is going to do or what I know the promises that the president has made, and I know and agree with you that he's trying to stand up and meet those promises. I think Secretary Perry is genuinely concerned and trying to meet the commitments of the administration. I think what they can do in coordination with the legislative branch is to keep peeling back these regulations that are making it difficult for coal-fired generation to exist. I personally believe that as we solve some of the issues, I think you're going to see new coal-fired power plants being built. Now, is it going to happen tomorrow? I can't say that for sure, but there is no question that coal-fired energy is the most cost-effective energy that we've ever seen, and we know that. So I think you're going to see that. I also believe that where the legislative branch can work with the administration is continuing to push to make sure that FERC is fully stood up, that it can function, so we don't see a big backlog on their rulings, and we need to make sure that FERC is held accountable to the things that they do. We can certainly have them in to testify before the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we've done that many, many times, and we will continue to do so. But I think regulatory reform is a big part of the solution, and keeping the focus just on how important coal is to the sustainment of our national energy grid.
Congressman, we know that you have to depart at this time to get to a budget meeting. We thank you so much for spending time with us today, and thank you for all that you're doing for the coal miners and the coal industry there and energy issues and Ohioans there in Congress. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Murray. And Jim, we'll see you around the campus.
God bless you, Bill.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
That's Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio's 6th District, and we're going to continue our discussion here. You know, Jim, Bob, as he just brought up some things there, of course, from the administration side. But when I'm looking at some of these reports here, Mr. Murray, there were some changes on FERC, and it looks like Mr. Smitherman, has he been installed then at FERC on the panel?
They have in the process of filling the fifth one. There is an empty, and he has not been confirmed yet. But they still could conduct business, and they have chosen not to. Much more would have been done had the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission supported the president. But on February 5th last year, they voted against a recommendation of Congressman Rick Perry and the president to address this issue. And it made no sense at all, except that there were some bad appointees, too, by the president himself. In the early days, there were a number of people on his staff that didn't get it. And,
yes.
They're gone. Cohn, the former president of Goldman Sachs, there's one there now that still doesn't get it. but it takes time to weed them out, and they made some bad recommendations. The panel is better than it was, but it's done nothing, absolutely nothing. And the utility commissions are not being addressed by anyone, they just, there's no regulation over it. The president has used the Continuing Resolution Act. There were a number of Obama regulations that I filed litigation against, and one of them was stayed at the Supreme Court level, the big one, the Clean Power Plan. And I did that to get them to the last 2 months of the Obama administration, because you can use the Continuing Resolution Act the last 2 months to overturn a president on these late-term regulations, which we did on a number of things. And of course, we got out of the climate accord, and have done many things to help coal regulation-wise, but there's still much yet to be done. It has slowed down, we don't even have, in many cases, take Charles Grassley, the Republican Senator for Iowa. He wants corn ethanol. That stuff costs a whole lot, and it raises food prices. But he's from Iowa, so he wants 15% ethanol in your gasoline. People on fixed income are paying too much for their gasoline because they're forced to use ethanol, 15%. That's Charles Grassley, a Republican, behind it. He supports wind power because they've got a lot of windmills in. So, as I said before, it's Republican or Democrat. Of course, the Democrats are all against low-cost, reliable electricity, but there are many Republicans that either choose to not do anything or have their own particular causes, like Charles Grassley, who really raised electric rates for folks in Ohio, or for a man who's trying to manufacture a product for a global marketplace that needs reliable electricity. One more point, Chris. You bring out Babcock. Yes, their business has been destroyed, just like our coal business.
Right.
Our miners, every job we have, according to university studies in the mines, 11 jobs are created for the goods and services for our coal miners, just in the local communities. So with my 7,000 employees, I have almost 100,000 people in this country that depend on us staying in business. I take that very seriously, that responsibility. You get trapped. And that's why at my age, 79, I'm still working 7 days a week, because you have to stay ahead of it. It is so bad. One more thing that I want to point out. Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in the world, Berkshire Hathaway, he's the fifth richest man in the world. He's the largest operator of windmills in the world.
Oh, boy.
He owns Midwest Power Company. And he says they don't make any sense. That's a direct quote. But I make a lot of money off the tax credits. And that's what you were referring to earlier, Chris. That windmill gets a 30% production tax credit that the ratepayer, who's out living on a fixed income or a single mom or a factory owner, is paying. It absolutely is upside down. And now when we have these socialists coming on the scene to further distort, I'm really worried for my grandchildren and my sons. I really am, because this thing is not moving in a sensible, sane direction where we can have the lowest cost electricity, most reliable electricity we can have, with no environmental degradation at all. None, zero. It's moved into a discussion where I almost can't watch television anymore, because the discussion has moved so far to socialism and to the left. I'm a working guy. I support working people just as the president, and yet it has got me worried to death, because it is a staple of life, reliable, low-cost electricity.
Yes.
And it's being destroyed.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to get back on the other side with some closing thoughts and advocacy of what you can do in writing your congressman and your senator on these issues that are ever so important for your family and the energy needs of this country. We'll be right back after this message. Don't go away.
Who's looking out for seniors today? It's not the AARP. AARP worked overtime to help pass Obamacare, the legislation that cut over $700 billion from Medicare. And AARP supports the death tax, which can rob families of over half their savings due to the death of a loved one. Seniors know that AARP would rather make millions peddling insurance products than support the policies that actually help America's elderly. That's why America's seniors count on the 60 Plus Association. For more than 20 years, 60 Plus has been fighting for the seniors that AARP has left behind. 60 Plus fought against Obamacare and continues to fight every day for its repeal in Washington. And 60 Plus is the leading national organization working to repeal the death tax once and for all, so that families can pass down their businesses and farms to the next generation, not the IRS. Stand up for your values. Join 60 Plus today. Visit 60plus.org or call 703-807-2070. This message paid for and authorized by the 60 Plus Association.
And talking about the 60 Plus Association, we have the chairman on the phone with us, Jim Martin, who's been part of our discussion this afternoon. And what we want to encourage you to do is to write your congressman, write your senator on these issues and send them a text message and actually also phone them. And in fact, 60plus.org is a seniors advocacy organization. And many of you, of course, appreciate the conservative work of the 60 Plus Association. It's not like the AARP, as you just heard in the radio spot, and of course the Ohio Christian Alliance and Christian Alliance of America. And Jim, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be asking our constituents to write their congressmen and start educating them on these issues of what we've heard on this radio broadcast today. And if you've missed any of this broadcast, if you're listening now, you can always go to our website at ohioca.org or just Google Ohio Christian Alliance, and then you can hear it in its entirety on the podcast as well. Jim, what can folks do really to let their congressmen and senators know about this issue?
Well, they can do what you just said, right? Call them, email them, if you will. But also, let me point out this. You mentioned earlier, Chris, in Ohio and Pennsylvania about the nuclear plants. Coincidentally enough, we are meeting tomorrow, the 60 Plus Association staff. We're meeting downtown with the Nuclear Energy Institute to talk about Ohio in Pennsylvania. Now, I looked it up right before we came on the program. We've got over 300,000 right-thinking seniors in the Buckeye State. We have about 700,000 in Pennsylvania. We're going to activate those folks to talk about nuclear because, as Bob Murray knows, coal and nuclear can carry the day. Wind and solar cannot do so. And so that's a great opportunity for us to get with the Nuclear Energy Institute. And by the way, Bill Gates, who's a liberal, owns Microsoft. The other day he came out for nuclear energy, and the enviros absolutely went berserk. Here he is, Bill Gates, talking about nuclear. Why? It has no carbon footprint. So we back this liberal at Microsoft because he is for nuclear. That is another energy source that we desperately need besides coal.
Well, that's right.
For Bob Murray.
And when you
and coal, but
well, when you hear nuclear, you hear coal with it right along with it. Well, it's in the same sentence because they're the two reliable sources that have been delivering reliable, affordable electricity to the grid, and yet it's the part of the industry that's taken the greatest hit during the Obama years.
And it's clean coal nowadays. I like to point out, being from Kentucky, where coal is king, it is clean coal thanks to innovations that Bob Murray and others have instituted. And by the way, I do want to mention one fellow I just heard about. Bob Murray knows the fellow, Dr. Richard Wolf. Here's the thing that he's doing in the field of coal use. Dr. Richard Wolf, I know he's a friend of Bob Murray. He sends his regards. I've never met him, but I've read a lot about him. But he's a coal scientist who years ago he invented and patented a process to use coal to produce a clean coal conversion. These are things that the mainstream media doesn't want to point out about coal. So that's another innovation. I think Dr. Wolf has a plant somewhere in Southern Virginia. and he's contemplating building one over in West Virginia. But these are innovators in the coal business, and I know he's a friend of Bob Murray.
Well, and again, it's our bottom line all the way around. It's that senior, it's that single mom, it's that family on a fixed income, affordable energy. The bottom line, why common sense energy is important to you is because of basically your monthly expenses. Mr. Murray, your thoughts?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One thing that we need to talk about on one of these programs that we haven't is while the person paying his electric bill is subsidizing windmills and solar panels 30%. You cannot rely on natural gas because it's volatile, it's expensive, it comes in a pipe, and it can be restricted at any time. So you have to have coal and nuclear, but there are no incentives with all this money going out for all these expensive ways to generate electricity. And as I've said, $40 versus $140 a kilowatt hour. That's a big spread. There's no incentives for developing clean coal. There are ways to burn coal much cleaner than we do, but the utilities won't do it because they want most of them be green and not follow the program. And as long as the ratepayers will pay for this foolish other ways to generate electricity, they make more money because it's new money. But there's no incentive in Washington to support clean coal technology and towards funding it. And that is just not fair. Coal is not playing on a level playing field, yet it's by far the lowest cost, most reliable way to generate electricity.
Mr. Murray, thank you so much for coming on the program. God bless you, sir, for all you're doing for the working men and women of this country. Jim Martin, thank you for being on the program as well, and thanks to Congressman Johnson. We've run out of time. We'll have you back. God bless you both. Thank you all you do. Thanks so much for being with us today.
You're listening to News in Focus with your host, Chris Long, president of the Ohio Christian Alliance. To learn more about the issues that matter most to you and your family, visit online at ohioca.org. That's ohioca.org. Thank you for listening. This program is sponsored by the Ohio Christian Alliance of Akron, Ohio.